Hey guys, tonight the Plague Doctor. That bird mask looks cool in video games, but the real job was entering plague houses where herbs and leather couldn't stop bacteria. That killed 60% of patients and eventually killed you too. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you are tuning in from and what time it is for you. It is always fascinating to see who is joining us from around the world. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You are standing outside a house in 1656, somewhere in Europe, probably Italy or France. The door is marked with a red cross. You know what that means. Everyone knows what that means. Plague inside that house. People are dying, screaming, vomiting, covered in swollen black buboes that leak pus and blood, and you're about to walk in them. Why? Because you are a plague doctor. And this is your job. Let's talk about the mask first, because that is what everyone remembers. The iconic beak mask that makes plague doctors look like nightmare birds. In popular culture, it is mysterious, even cool. In reality, wearing that mask was like strapping a leather oven to your face and trying to breathe through herbs while your own sweat dripped into your eyes. The mask wasn't designed to look creepy. It was designed based on miasma theory, the idea that disease spread through bad air. The beak was stuffed with herbs, flowers, spices, anything that smelled strong. Lavender, rose petals, camphor, cloves, sometimes vinegar, soap sponges. The theory was that these pleasant smells would purify the air you breathed and protect you from plague. Spoiler alert, they didn't. What actually spread plague? Fleas on rats, and in some cases, airborne droplets from pneumonic plague victims. Your beak full of lavender did exactly nothing to stop Yersinia pestis, the bacterium that causes plague, from entering your lungs. But you didn't know that. Nobody knew that. So you stuffed your mask with flowers and hoped for the best. Wearing the mask was sensory hell. The leather was hot. The eye holes were small, made of glass or crystal, and they fogged up constantly. Your field of vision was maybe 60 degrees. You couldn't see to your sides. You couldn't look down without tilting your entire head. You walked into plague houses, essentially half blind, hoping you wouldn't trip over bodies or furniture. The smell inside the mask was overwhelming. Yes, you'd stuffed it with pleasant, smelling herbs. But those herbs were now mixing with your own breath, your sweat, and the leather smell of the mask itself. After an hour, the lavender stopped being pleasant and started being nauseating. But you couldn't take the mask off. Outside the mask was plague air. Inside the mask was hot, herb, scented suffocation. You chose suffocation. Breathing was hard. The herbs and sponges blocked airflow. Each breath required effort. You are walking upstairs to examine a patient, and you are gasping inside your leather bird head, trying to get enough oxygen while your heart pounds and sweat runs down your face. You can't wipe the sweat. Your hands are gloved. Wiping your face means removing the mask, and removing the mask means breathing plague air. So the sweat just drips. The mask had no ventilation. None. Any moisture from your breath condensed inside. After a few hours, the inside of your mask was damp. That dampness made the herbs soggy. Soggy herbs smell different than dry herbs. Less pleasant. More like rotting vegetation. You are breathing in hot, wet herb, rot smell, while trying to examine plague victims. It is disgusting. But it is protection, allegedly. Let's talk about the rest of your outfit, because the mask was just the beginning. You are wearing a full-length leather or waxed canvas coat. Heavy. Hot, designed to prevent plague from touching your skin. The coat goes from your neck to your ankles. In summer, in houses where the windows are closed because people believed fresh air spread disease. The temperature inside these plague houses was often over 90 degrees Fahrenheit. You are wearing what is essentially a leather sleeping bag while working in a sauna. Under the coat you've got regular clothes, shirt, pants, maybe a vest. These get soaked with sweat within the first hour. The leather coat doesn't breathe. It traps all your body heat. You are essentially steaming yourself inside your own protective gear. Your clothes are wet. Your skin is wet. You are overheating, but you can't remove the coat because that is what is protecting you. Except it is not really protecting you. But you believe it is, so you suffer. Gloves. Thick leather gloves, also waxed or treated to be impermeable. Your hands sweat inside them. The gloves make fine motor control impossible. You are trying to examine a patient, to check their pulse, to look at their buboes. but you can't feel anything through the thick leather. You are basically wearing oven mitts while trying to do medical examinations. It is absurd, but it is protocol. Boots, heavy leather boots, also waxed, going up to your knees. Your feet are sweltering. The boots don't breathe. Your socks are soaked. You are developing blisters. But you need the boots because you are walking through houses where people have been sick for days or weeks. The floors are covered in vomit, blood, pus, urine, feces. The boots keep you from stepping directly in human fluids. Small mercy. Very small. You are carrying a wooden cane or stick. This isn't for walking. It is for touching things without using your hands. You need to examine a patient but don't want to touch them directly. You use the stick to lift blankets, to point, to push things aside. Some plague doctors use the stick to keep patients at distance. Stay back. I'll examine you from here with my stick. It is dehumanizing for the patient and absurd from a medical standpoint. But it is what you've got. Now let's talk about what you actually do in these plague houses. Your job isn't really to cure people. There is no cure. Your job is to document, to witness, to provide whatever comfort you can, and most importantly, to declare people dead so they can be removed and buried. You are less a doctor and more a walking death certificate. You enter a house. The smell hits you even through your herb-filled mask. It is the smell of death, of unwashed sick bodies, of waste, of rot. The plague produces distinctive smells. The buboes, when they rupture, smell like decay. The vomit smells acidic and wrong. The fear, sweat of dying people, has its own scent. All of this seeps through your herbs and into your awareness. The house is dark. Windows are closed and covered. People believed night air was especially dangerous, so you're examining patients by candlelight or oil lamp while wearing a mask with limited visibility. You are basically working in the dark. You can't see details. You can't properly assess conditions. You are going through the motions of medicine while essentially blind, overheated, and oxygen deprived. You approach the patient, they're in bed probably. Fever has them, they're sweating, shaking, delirious. The buboes are visible. Swollen lymph nodes the size of eggs or larger, usually in the groin. Armpits or neck, black or dark purple. Some have ruptured, leaking. The patient is in agony. They're begging for help, for water, for relief, for death, anything to make it stop. You check their pulse with your leather, gloved hand. You can't really feel it, but you pretend you can. You look at their buboes, keeping your distance, using your stick to gently prod. Not to help them, to assess how close to death they are. The bigger and darker the buboes, the worse the prognosis. If the buboes have turned black and the skin around them is necrotic, they're probably dying. If the patient is coughing blood, they've developed pneumonic plague. They're definitely dying. And now they're much more contagious. What is your treatment? This is where it gets grimly funny. You have essentially 3 options, none of them effective. First, bloodletting. The theory is that plague is caused by an imbalance of humours. Removing blood will restore balance. You cut the patient or apply leeches. The patient, already weakened by plague, loses more blood. This doesn't help. It often makes things worse. But it is standard medical practice, so you do it. Second, lancing the buboes. You take a knife and cut open the swollen lymph nodes to drain them. This is as horrible as it sounds. The patient screams. The bubo erupts with pus and blood. The smell is indescribable. And does it help? Sometimes. Maybe. If the bubo was about to rupture anyway, lancing it might prevent some internal damage. But mostly, you are just causing immense pain for minimal benefit. Third, poultices and prayers. You apply herbal mixtures to the buboes. Onions, garlic, butter mixed with herbs. Sometimes crushed emeralds if the patient is wealthy. These do nothing medically. But there's something to do. Medicine in the plague era was mostly theatre. You performed rituals that looked like medicine, that felt like medicine, that gave patients and families the sense that something was being done, even when that something was useless. You also pray. A lot. You recite prayers over patients, bless them, assure them that God will provide. This is partly spiritual duty, and partly because there is literally nothing else you can do. Medical knowledge in the 1600s was insufficient to treat bacterial infections. Antibiotics wouldn't be discovered for another 300 years. So you pray, and you hope, and you watch people die anyway. And they do die, most of them. Mortality rates for bubonic plague ranged from 40 to 60%. For pneumonic plague, closer to 90%. You walk into these houses knowing that most patients you see will be dead within days, sometimes within hours. Your job isn't to save them. It is to witness their suffering and document their deaths. When someone dies, you record it. Name, date, symptoms. This information goes to city officials who track plague deaths. The numbers are staggering. During major outbreaks, hundreds die per Dalton Y in large cities, thousands per week. You are documenting an apocalypse in real time, one death certificate at a time. You are also responsible for marking houses. When someone in a house has plague, you paint or chalk a red cross on the door. Sometimes you add the words, "Lord have mercy on us." This mark tells everyone to stay away. It quarantines the house. Everyone inside, sick or healthy, is trapped there. They can't leave. If one family member has plague, everyone has to stay inside until either everyone recovers or everyone dies. This creates horror scenarios. You've got a house with 7 people. One gets plague. You mark the door. The family is quarantined. A week later you return. 4 are dead. 2 are sick. 1 is still healthy but terrified, trapped in a house with corpses and dying relatives. There is nothing you can do except document it and move to the next house. The social isolation is intense. You are a plague doctor. People fear you almost as much as they fear the plague. You walk down the street in your bird mask and leather coat, and people flee, cross to the other side, duck into buildings. Parents pull their children away. You are associated with death. You come from plague houses. You might be carrying the disease on your clothes, your equipment, your mask. You probably are carrying it, actually. So people avoid you. You can't go home between house calls. You are too dangerous. You stay in designated plague doctor lodgings, separate from the general population. You are isolated, quarantined by your own profession. You might not see your family for weeks or months, if you have a family. Many plague doctors were unmarried, because who would marry someone with such a dangerous job? Meals are left outside your door. You eat alone. You sleep alone. You spend your days surrounded by death, and your nights surrounded by silence. The psychological toll is immense. You are watching people die, unable to help them, knowing you might be next. You are isolated from all normal human contact. You are feared and avoided. The only people who want to see you are the dying and the desperate. Let's talk about compensation, because you are not doing this for free. Plague doctors were paid well, relatively speaking. Cities hired them on contract during outbreaks. The pay was high because the job was dangerous and unpopular. You could make several times what a regular physician made. But there is a catch, actually. Several catches. First, you often don't get paid until the outbreak ends. The city promises payment, but delivers it later. If you die during the outbreak, your family might not receive your wages. The city might claim you didn't complete your contract, so you are risking your life for money you might never see. Second, even if you get paid, spending it is difficult. After an outbreak, you are associated with plague. Shopkeepers don't want your money. It might be contaminated. Innkeepers don't want you in their establishments. You worked with plague victims, so you are probably infected. Your money is good, but you are not welcome. It is wealth you can't easily use. Third, the pay is high because the life expectancy is low. Cities offer good wages for plague doctors because they expect to hire multiple people as each one dies. You are being paid danger money. The wage reflects the likelihood that you'll die doing this job. It is not generous compensation. It is a death benefit paid in advance. Some plague doctors were volunteers, motivated by duty or faith. Priests, monks, nuns, they serve the sick out of religious obligation. Their mortality rate was even higher than professional plague doctors, because they often had less protective equipment and more direct contact with patients. Faith didn't protect them from bacteria. They died in huge numbers, martyrs to compassion and ignorance. Other plague doctors were coerced. Some were criminals offered freedom in exchange for service. Others were debtors working off obligations. Serve as a plague doctor, and your debts are forgiven. Of course, you'll probably die, so the creditors lose money either way. But at least someone's attending to the plague victims. It is a grim calculation. Now let's talk about what happens when you get infected, because you will get infected. The question isn't if, it is when. You are spending hours every day in close proximity to plague victims. Your protective equipment is mostly ineffective. You are breathing the same air, touching contaminated surfaces, exposed to fleas, exposed to respiratory droplets if patients cough. Infection is virtually guaranteed. The first sign is fever. You wake up one morning and you are hot. Not the normal hot of wearing a leather coat in summer. Burning hot. Fever hot. Your head aches. Your body aches. You feel weak. You tell yourself it is exhaustion. You've been working hard. It is just fatigue. But you know better. You've seen this progression hundreds of times in patients. You know what comes next. The buboes appear. Within a day or two, you feel the swelling. Usually in your groin or armpit. A lump forming under your skin. Tender at first, then painful. You press on it gently. It is hot. It is growing. Within hours, it is the size of a walnut. By the next day, it is the size of an egg. The pain is intense. Moving hurts. Touching it is agony. You know this feeling. You've examined it in dozens of patients. Now, it is your turn. You are alone. Other plague doctors might help you, but they're busy with their own patients. Regular doctors won't come near you. You are a plague doctor who has caught plague. You are the most contaminated person imaginable. So you suffer alone in your quarantine lodging. You are delirious with fever. The buboes are swelling. You might try to lance them yourself. You've done it for patients. Now you are doing it to yourself. The pain is worse than you imagined. If you are lucky, the buboes will swell and rupture naturally. This is actually the better outcome. If the bubo bursts, it releases the pressure. The pain decreases slightly. You might survive. About 40 to 60% of bubonic plague victims survived. Remember, you might be one of them. You might not be. If you are unlucky, you develop pneumonic plague. The bacteria reach your lungs. You start coughing, then coughing blood. Your lungs are filling with fluid. You are drowning from the inside. You can't breathe. You panic, which makes breathing harder. Pneumonic plague kills quickly, usually within days of respiratory symptoms starting. Once you are coughing blood, your chances of survival dramatically. You die alone. No family at your bedside. No friends holding your hand. Other plague doctors might find you eventually, or maybe not. Maybe you are just another corpse in a city full of corpses. You are loaded onto a death cart with dozens of other bodies. You are dumped in a plague pit, a mass grave on the outskirts of town. No funeral, no ceremony, no gravestone. Just a pile of lime, covered bodies in a hole. This was the fate of many plague doctors. They took the job, worked for weeks or months, contracted the disease, and died. Their sacrifice is barely remembered. History knows the plague killed millions, but individual plague doctors are mostly anonymous. They died trying to help, using ineffective methods, believing they were making a difference. They weren't making a difference medically, but they were bearing witness. They were staying when everyone else fled. Let's talk about the psychological horror of the job. You are not just dealing with sick people, you are dealing with the collapse of society. During major plague outbreaks, normal life stops. Shops close. Markets shut down. People stop going to church because churches are plague vectors. Bodies pile up faster than they can be buried. The city smells like death. It smells like rot and fear and desperation. You see things that break your mind. You see entire families dead in their beds. Parents and children, all killed within days of each other. You see people driven mad by fever, screaming about demons and hellfire. You see patients in such agony that they beg you to kill them. Please make it stop. Just let me die. And you can't help them. You can't ease their pain. You can only watch. You see society's breakdown in small, horrible ways. People refuse to help their own family members. Husbands abandon sick wives. Parents abandon sick children. Not because they're cruel, but because they're terrified. Plague is a death sentence. Staying with the sick means dying with them. So people make terrible choices. They save themselves and live with the guilt. Or they stay and die with their loved ones. You see the best and worst of humanity. You see people who risk everything to help strangers. Nuns who nurse the sick until they drop dead from exhaustion and infection. Neighbors who deliver food to quarantined houses. People who donate money for plague relief. These people restore your faith in humanity. Some of them die for their kindness. Many of them do. You also see looters. People who break into plague houses after the occupants die, stealing valuables. They contaminate themselves and spread the plague further, but they don't care. They see opportunity in tragedy. You see merchants who raise prices on food and medicine, profiting from desperation. You see officials who flee the city, abandoning their posts and their people. You see corruption, cowardice, and cruelty. And you are in the middle of all this, wearing your bird mask, walking from house to house, documenting death. You are a witness to apocalypse. The things you see don't leave you. They can't leave you. You'll carry them forever. If you survive, which you probably won't, you'll have nightmares for the rest of your life. You'll hear the screams of plague victims. You'll smell the rot. You'll see the buboes. It never leaves. Let's talk about the actual medical theories you are working with, because they're fascinatingly wrong. The miasma theory, the dominant theory of disease in plague times, held that disease spread through bad air, corrupt vapors, poisonous atmospheres. This theory is completely incorrect, but it seemed logical at the time. Plague struck cities more than countryside. Cities smelled bad, therefore bad smells caused plague. The logic was flawed, but it was the best they had. So plague doctors tried to combat bad air with good smells, hence the herbs in your mask, hence the practice of burning aromatic woods in sick rooms, hence the pomanders, small containers of perfume that people carried. Everyone was trying to purify the air because everyone believed air was the problem. The actual problem was bacteria transmitted by fleas, and in some cases, respiratory droplets. But nobody knew about bacteria. Microscopes existed, but weren't powerful enough to see bacteria. Germ theory wouldn't be developed for another 2 centuries. So plague doctors worked with completely incorrect models of disease, which meant their treatments were useless, and their protective equipment was inadequate. Some theories were even worse than miasma. Astrological plague theory suggested that planetary alignments caused plague. Certain configurations of planets created vapors that corrupted the air and caused disease. This theory was widely believed. Doctors consulted astrological charts to predict plague outbreaks. They gave medical advice based on star positions. It was astrology masquerading as medicine, and it killed people by distracting from actual preventive measures. Religious theory blamed sin. Plague was divine punishment for humanity's wickedness. The cure was repentance, prayer, and penance. Flagellants whipped themselves bloody in public, believing their suffering would appease God and end the plague. It didn't work. The plague continued, but the belief persisted because people needed an explanation, and religious explanation was deeply ingrained in medieval and early modern culture. Some theories were just bizarre. Plague was caused by earthquakes releasing poisonous gases from underground. Plague was caused by looking at infected people, transmitted through the eyes. Plague was caused by Jewish conspiracies to poison wells. This last theory led to massacres of Jewish communities. Thousands were murdered based on plague panic and anti-Semitism. The plague continued because killing Jewish people doesn't cure bacterial infections. As a plague doctor, you are supposed to be an expert. People look to you for answers. Why is this happening? How do we stop it? And you give them answers based on miasma theory, astrological observations, and religious interpretation. Your answers are wrong, but you believe them. You have to believe them. If you don't believe you are doing something effective, you'd never be able to do this job. Now let's talk about the equipment failures. Your protective gear is supposed to keep you safe. It doesn't. Let's break down why. The leather coat is good at keeping large droplets off your skin. If someone coughs or vomits directly on you, the leather provides some protection, but plague fleas can crawl through leather seams. Bacteria can survive on leather surfaces. You are touching contaminated things with your gloves, then touching your face, your mask, your coat. You are contaminating yourself constantly. The mask's eye lenses are glass or crystal, non-porous, good, but there are gaps around the lenses. Air leaks in plague bacteria in the air can enter through these gaps. The mask isn't airtight. It can't be. If it were truly airtight, you'd suffocate. So you are breathing partially filtered air at best. The herbs might make the air smell better, but they're not filtering out bacteria. Your gloves prevent direct skin contact, but you are still touching contaminated surfaces and then touching other things. Your cane, your clothing, your mask adjustments. Plague doctors had no concept of cross-contamination. They didn't know about bacterial transfer. So they'd examine a patient, touch contaminated bedding, then touch their face or their food without washing hands. The gloves gave false confidence. The boots kept body fluids off your feet, but fleas could jump onto the leather. Rat fleas are jumpers. They'd hop onto your boots, crawl up your legs, find gaps in your protective clothing, and bite you. One flea bite was enough. Yersinia pestis doesn't need much of an entry point. A single flea carrying bacteria from an infected rat could give you plague. and you are walking through plague houses full of rats, full of fleas. The odds are stacked against you. Decontamination protocols were inadequate. After leaving a plague house, you might wash your gloved hands in vinegar. Vinegar has some antimicrobial properties, but it is not sufficient for plague bacteria. You might have your coat fumigated with smoke or aromatic vapors. This did almost nothing. You couldn't wash the leather coat effectively because water would damage it. So you wore the same contaminated coat day after day, carrying plague bacteria from house to house. Your mask was rarely cleaned properly. It should have been sanitized after every house call. In practice, you wore the same mask for weeks. The herbs inside became moldy. The leather absorbed sweat and fluids. The mask became a bacterial breeding ground attached to your face. You thought you were protecting yourself. You were actually breathing through a contaminated sponge. Let's talk about specific plague doctor experiences from historical records. There are accounts, though not many. Most plague doctors didn't survive to write memoirs, and those who did often didn't want to relive the trauma. But some accounts exist, and they're haunting. One plague doctor in London during the 1665 outbreak described entering a house where an entire family had died. 7 bodies in various states of decomposition. The smell was so bad it penetrated his herb. Filled mask. The youngest victim was an infant, still in its cradle. The mother had died trying to reach the child. He had to document each death, note the locations of buboes, estimate time of death. He did this alone in a house of corpses. He was 24 years old. Another account from Milan describes a plague doctor who treated over 200 patients during a 6-month outbreak. He survived. This was unusual enough to be noteworthy. He attributed his survival to constantly changing his herbs, to prayer and to luck. Modern interpretation, he probably had some natural immunity or got incredibly lucky with flea exposure. His survival was an anomaly. A French plague doctor kept detailed notes on patient symptoms. He noticed that some patients with buboes in certain locations had better survival rates. He theorized about internal versus external buboes, about drainage patterns, about the significance of bubo color. He was trying to understand the disease scientifically, working with limited tools and incorrect theories. He died of plague 3 months into his research. His notes survived. His observations were accurate, but his interpretations were wrong. He didn't know about lymphatic systems or bacterial loads. He was groping in the dark for understanding. There are accounts of plague doctors going mad. The psychological stress broke them. One doctor in Venice reportedly started laughing uncontrollably while examining patients. He couldn't stop. He laughed while documenting deaths, laughed while marking houses. He'd had a mental break. Authorities removed him from duty. He was found dead a week later, whether from plague or suicide, records don't specify. Some plague doctors turned to alcohol. Heavy drinking numbed the horror. They'd examine patients while drunk, document deaths while intoxicated. The alcohol impaired their judgment and made them more careless. This increased their infection risk, but it also made the job bearable. Sobriety meant confronting the full horror of what they were witnessing. Drunkenness provided temporary escape. Others turned deeply religious. They prayed constantly, saw themselves as instruments of divine will. They believed God was protecting them in their service to the sick. This belief gave them courage and purpose. Whether it actually protected them is irrelevant. The belief helped them function in impossible circumstances. Many religious plague doctors died, just like the others, still believing they were doing God's work. Let's talk about the children. Plague didn't spare children. In fact, children often died at higher rates than adults. Their immune systems were less developed. Their survival chances were worse. As a plague doctor, you examined a lot of sick and dying children. Parents would bring you to their child's bedside, desperate for help. And you couldn't help. You'd examine the child, see the buboes, see the fever, and know the child was dying. Parents would beg, please, save them. They're only 5 years old. They haven't lived yet. Please do something. And you'd apply your useless poultices, you'd say your prayers. You'd tell the parents to keep the child comfortable. There was nothing else to do. The child would die within days, sometimes within hours. You'd return to document the death. The parents would be destroyed. You'd move to the next house. Some parents couldn't accept it. They'd hide sick children, hoping the plague would pass, that their child would be the exception. This spread the disease further, but you understood it. Marking a house as plague. Infected meant quarantine, meant no one in or out, meant the whole family trapped with the sick child. If they hid the infection, they could leave, could seek help elsewhere. It never worked. The child died anyway. Other family members often got infected from the close contact. You'd return weeks later to find multiple bodies. Other parents abandoned sick children, left them alone in houses, fled the city. You'd find children alone, delirious with fever, dying without comfort or care. Some were infants. They couldn't even call for help. They just lay there until they died. You'd find them days later when neighbours reported the crying had stopped. This was the plague at its worst. The fear so intense that parents abandoned their own children to save themselves. You couldn't judge them. Judgment was a luxury for people not living through apocalypse. You documented the deaths and moved on. There were always more houses, more patients, more deaths. The children were the hardest. Every plague doctor mentioned the children, the small bodies, the confusion in their eyes. Why do I hurt? Why won't it stop? No answers you could give would help. Now let's talk about the scams and charlatans. When people are desperate, frauds emerge. Fake plague doctors appeared during outbreaks, offering miracle cures for money. They'd sell tonics, amulets, blessed objects. None of it worked. All of it was expensive. These frauds took advantage of dying people, extracted their last coins, and disappeared. Real plague doctors hated these charlatans, not just for the fraud, but because it undermined trust. When a fake doctor's cure failed, people lost faith in all doctors. They'd refuse real medical examination, such as it was, because they'd been scammed before. This made your job harder. You'd arrive to help, and people would slam doors in your face. You are just another fraud. Get away from us. We're not paying. Some frauds impersonated official plague doctors. They'd make crude bird masks, wear dark coats, claim to represent the city. They'd enter homes, examine patients briefly, then demand payment for their services. Sometimes they stole valuables while the family was distracted. Sick people couldn't chase them. Healthy family members were too afraid of the fake doctor's supposed plague exposure to stop them. The city tried to control this. Official plague doctors were given badges or certificates. But in the chaos of an outbreak, verification was difficult. A man in a bird mask claiming to be a doctor was usually accepted. The fake doctors knew this. They exploited panic and confusion. Many were never caught. They'd work during the outbreak, steal what they could, then disappear when the plague subsided. Even some real plague doctors engaged in questionable practices. Patients desperate for treatment would pay enormous sums. Some doctors charged based on ability to pay. Rich patients paid more for the same useless treatments. This was exploitation, but it was also economic reality. Plague doctors needed income, and the wealthy could afford it. The poor received minimal attention. Another injustice in a world full of them. Let's talk about the aftermath. For plague doctors who survived. The outbreak ends. The death toll is tallied. Thousands, tens of thousands, sometimes hundreds of thousands, dead. Entire neighborhoods depopulated. Orphans everywhere. Economic collapse. Social trauma. And you survived. You made it through. What now? You are traumatized. The things you've seen don't leave. You have nightmares. You wake up smelling rot. You see buboes on healthy people. Phantom symptoms. You jump at every fever, every cough. You are hyper, aware of disease, paranoid about infection. You wash your hands compulsively. You avoid crowds. You can't be in enclosed spaces without panicking. This is what we'd now call PTSD. But in plague times, it was just what happened to people who survived. You are socially isolated. People know you were a plague doctor. They're grateful, maybe, but they're also wary. You were around plague for months. Who knows what you are carrying? You could be contaminated. Your presence makes people uncomfortable. They appreciate what you did, but they'd rather you did it somewhere else. Employment is difficult. You've been a plague doctor. That is your recent work experience. Other medical work is hard to find. Regular patients don't want a doctor who specialized in plague. Your hands have touched buboes. Your clothes have been in plague houses. You are associated with death. Building a normal medical practice is nearly impossible. Some former plague doctors left medicine entirely. The trauma was too much. They couldn't continue. They took other jobs, tried to forget. The memories didn't let them forget. Others continued as country doctors in remote areas where their past was less known. They treated regular ailments, delivered babies, set bones. They tried to help people without watching them die. It was better, but it wasn't healing. The plague years marked them permanently. A few wrote about their experiences. These accounts are valuable historical records, but writing about it meant reliving it, remembering the houses, the patients, the smells, the sounds, the screaming, the begging, the silence after death. Writing these accounts was cathartic for some, traumatic for others. Many started writing and couldn't finish. The memories were too much. Society moved on quickly. Plagues ended. Life resumed. Markets reopened. People went back to work. Marriages happened. Children were born. The city rebuilt. Within a few years, the plague was just history. But for you, it never became history. It stayed present. Every day, you lived with what you'd seen and done. Society forgot. You couldn't. Compensation issues often arose. Cities promised payment, then haggled over amounts. You risked your life for this money. The city claimed you didn't work as many days as reported, or that you abandoned your post, or that the contract was void for some technical reason. You'd have to fight for payment, which meant staying in the city, around officials, reliving the outbreak through disputes and paperwork. Some plague doctors never received full payment. They died before collecting, or the city went bankrupt from plague expenses. Paying plague doctors was a low priority when the city had to deal with orphans, food shortages, economic recovery. Your service was appreciated in theory, but not in budgetary practice. The danger money you'd risked your life for might never arrive. Let's talk about family. If you had family before becoming a plague doctor, you probably lost contact with them during the outbreak. You were quarantined, they were protected, months passed. If you survived and returned, you were changed. They'd aged during your absence, and so had you. But you'd aged differently. You'd seen things they couldn't imagine. You'd been places they feared. The distance between you and them was more than physical. Spouses sometimes left plague doctors. The trauma, the distance, the changes. You are not the person they married. You are damaged, haunted, different. They tried to understand, but they couldn't. They hadn't been there. They hadn't seen. The marriage often ended, not from lack of love, but from unbridgeable experience. Children feared plague doctor parents. You are the person in the scary mask. You are associated with death. Your children heard stories about plague doctors, and those stories were about you. They didn't understand. They just knew you went away, and when you came back, you were sad and angry and different. Some children never reconnected with plague doctor parents. The gulf was too wide. New relationships were difficult. How do you explain what you've done? On a first date, do you mention you've examined hundreds of plague corpses? Do you talk about the time you found an entire family dead, including an infant? Do you share that you wake up screaming? This information repels people, understandably, so you hide it. You pretend to be normal. The relationship is built on concealment. It is not sustainable. Some plague doctors never had relationships again. They were too changed, too damaged. They lived alone, worked alone, died alone. Their sacrifice was absolute. They gave their lives to plague service, even if they survived physically. Psychologically, socially, emotionally, they died during the outbreak. What continued was just a body going through motions. Now let's talk about the existential horror of the job. You are a plague doctor because someone has to be. Society needs witnesses to the dying. Someone has to count the dead. Someone has to mark the houses. Someone has to provide the illusion of medical care, even when real care is impossible. You are performing a function that is necessary but futile. Every patient you see will probably die. You know this, they know this, their families know this. But everyone pretends you might help. You examine them carefully. You make concerned faces. You try treatments. You know don't work. You are participating in a shared fiction that medicine can stop this. It can't. You are theatre, not treatment. But the theatre matters because people need hope, even false hope. You are a symbol. The bird mask is iconic. When people see you walking down the street, they know plague is here. You are the physical manifestation of disease and death. Children fear you. Adults avoid you. But everyone needs you. It is a strange existence, being both essential and despised. You are wanted and unwanted simultaneously. The religious implications weighed on many plague doctors. If plague is divine punishment, are you interfering with God's will? Are you fighting against divine judgment? Some priests argued that trying to cure plague was sinful pride. God sent the plague, humans should accept it. Other religious figures argued that healing was Christian duty. God sent plague as a test. Humans should help the afflicted. You are caught in theological debates while people are dying. Church officials argue about whether your job is holy or heretical while you are examining corpses. The philosophical questions are interesting in theory. In practice, you are too tired and too traumatized to care. You just do the job because someone has to do it. The futility becomes overwhelming. You've examined hundreds of patients. You've tried every treatment. You've prayed over dozens of dying people. And they die anyway. All of them. Nearly all of them. Your success rate is maybe 40% if you are generous with the definition of success. Most patients die. Your interventions don't save them. At some point, you question why you are doing this at all. But then you remember documentation. Even if you can't save people, you can record what happened. The numbers matter for city planning, for understanding the disease, for history. Your observations are data. Data that might help future generations. It is cold comfort when you are watching a child die. But it is something. Your work has meaning even if it doesn't have immediate results. Let's talk about the sensory overload of the job. Your mask restricts vision and breathing. You are overheated in your leather coat. Your hands are clumsy in thick gloves. And then there is the sensory input from the plague houses themselves. The sounds, smells, sights. It is overwhelming. Your brain can only process so much horror before it starts shutting down. The sounds are terrible. Screaming from pain, moaning from fever, crying from family members, coughing, vomiting, gasping, prayers and pleas. The sounds of people in agony, in terror, in despair. These sounds penetrate your mask. They stay in your ears after you leave. You hear them at night. You hear them during quiet moments. The screams never stop. Even when the actual screaming has ended. The smells are worse. Unwashed sick bodies, waste and vomit, rotting buboes, gangrene. The distinctive smell of death, of decay, blood and pus. These smells seep through your herbs. They cling to your clothes. You smell them on yourself hours after leaving a plague house. You can't wash them out. They're absorbed into your leather coat, your skin, your consciousness. You smell plague everywhere. On food, on your bedding, in the air. It is always there. The sights haunt you, emaciated bodies, black buboes, blood, soaked sheets, open sores, the fixed stare of corpses, the fear in dying patients' eyes, the desperation in family members' faces, the bodies stacked in death carts, the mass graves. You see these things every day, multiple times a day. They're burned into your memory. You can't unsee them. Your brain starts to compartmentalize, you dissociate. You are performing actions, but you are not fully present. You examine a patient, but you are not really there. You are watching yourself from outside your body. It is a protective mechanism. Full presence would break you, so your mind removes you slightly from the experience. You are going through motions automatically. It helps you function. It also disconnects you from humanity. This dissociation makes you seem cold. Family members think you don't care. You examine their dying loved one with no visible emotion. You declare death without tears. You mark their door and move on. They think you are heartless. You are not. You care too much. If you let yourself feel everything, you'd collapse, so you feel nothing, or appear to feel nothing. It is survival, but it is also loss. You are losing your capacity for emotional connection to protect yourself from emotional destruction. Now let's talk about the historical context. Plague wasn't one outbreak. It was recurring horror. The Black Death in the 14th century killed a third of Europe, but plague kept returning. Outbreaks every few years or decades. Cities would barely recover, and plague would hit again. This meant generations grew up expecting plague. It was a fact of life, like winter or taxes. Deadly, inevitable, recurring. Plague doctors existed because plague was constant. Cities kept them on retainer or hired them during outbreaks. The profession existed because the disease persisted. If plague had been eliminated, plague doctors would have become obsolete. But plague continued for centuries. From the Black Death in 1347 until the last major European outbreak in Marseille in 1720, plague was a recurring disaster. That is nearly 400 years of intermittent plague. Generations of plague doctors. The disease itself was bacterial, Yersinia pestis, carried by fleas on rats. But European cities were ideal plague vectors. Dense populations, poor sanitation, ubiquitous rats. The black rat, Rattus rattus, thrived in European cities. These rats carried the fleas. The fleas carried the bacteria. Humans were incidental hosts. The plague didn't target humans specifically. We just got caught in a transmission cycle between rats and fleas. Understanding this didn't come until the late 19th century. Alexander Yersin identified the bacterium in 1894. Before that, 4.5 centuries of plague doctors worked with completely incorrect disease models. They tried to cure plague with bloodletting and herbs because they didn't know about bacteria. Their failure wasn't personal inadequacy. It was systematic ignorance. They couldn't succeed because they didn't understand the actual cause. This makes plague doctors tragic figures. They risked their lives. Many died, all for treatments that couldn't work. Their courage and sacrifice were real. Their methods were useless. History often mocks medieval medicine, and some mockery is deserved. But plague doctors deserve sympathy, not ridicule. They did their best with inadequate knowledge and died trying to help. Let's talk about the long-term effects on survivors. Plague survivors often had permanent damage. The buboes could cause lasting lymphatic issues. Scarring was common. Some lost fingers or toes to gangrene. Many had weakened immune systems afterward. Psychological trauma was universal. Survivors carried physical and mental scars for life. Plague doctors who survived often had worse outcomes than regular plague survivors. They'd been exposed more intensely and more frequently. Their risk of complications was higher. Their psychological trauma was more severe. They'd witnessed hundreds of deaths, not just a few family members. The scale of horror they'd experienced was different. Some survivors became advocates for public health reform. They'd seen how crowding and poor sanitation spread disease. They pushed for cleaner cities, better waste management, wider streets. These reforms happened slowly, over centuries, but former plague doctors contributed to the push. Their experience gave them authority. They'd been there. They'd seen the mechanism of spread, even if they didn't understand the specific bacterial pathway. Other survivors became reclusive. They couldn't reintegrate into society. They lived on the edges of towns, avoided people, found peace in solitude. This wasn't weakness. It was self-preservation. They'd had enough of humanity for one lifetime. They'd seen people at their worst. They wanted distance. They'd earned it. A few became historians, recording what happened for future generations. These accounts are invaluable. They described symptoms, progression, mortality rates, social impacts. They documented the plague not from books, but from direct experience. Their observations were detailed and accurate, even if their explanations were wrong. History benefits from their dedication to documentation. Even while dying from the disease, they were documenting. So here you are, a plague doctor in the 17th century. You wake up in your quarantine lodgings. You put on your leather coat, already soaked with yesterday's sweat. You attach your bird mask. Stuff it with fresh herbs that will be overwhelming within the hour. You grab your wooden cane. You walk out into streets that smell like death and fear. You have a list of houses to visit. Each house is a small apocalypse. Each patient is dying, or will be soon. You'll examine them with useless tools. You'll apply useless treatments. You'll pray useless prayers. And they'll die anyway. You'll document each death, mark each house, and move to the next one. You'll do this every day for weeks or months until the outbreak ends or until you die from plague. Most plague doctors died. You probably will too. The bird mask and leather coat won't save you. The herbs won't protect you. You are walking into disease with inadequate protection and incorrect medical theories. Your survival is unlikely. But you do it anyway because someone has to. Because the dying need witnesses, because the dead need counting, because society needs the illusion that something is being done. You are that something. You are the person who stands between total chaos and documented tragedy. Your role isn't to cure, it is to witness, and you'll witness until you can't anymore. That is what it meant to be a plague doctor, not the cool mysterious figure from art and video games. A traumatized medical professional doing futile work in lethal conditions with inadequate protection and incorrect information. They were brave and doomed. They served and died. They witnessed apocalypse and documented it for people who didn't have to see it. Modern pandemics remind us of plague doctors. COVID-19 healthcare workers wore protective equipment, risked infection, witnessed mass death. Their equipment was better. Their medical knowledge was vastly superior. But the psychological toll, the risk, the exhaustion, these were similar. Healthcare workers during COVID got a glimpse of what plague doctors experienced. Only a glimpse. The plague was worse. But the glimpse was enough to show the courage required. Plague doctors deserve remembrance, not as spooky figures in bird masks, but as people who sacrificed themselves in futile service to the dying. They failed medically. They succeeded morally. They couldn't cure plague, but they stayed when everyone else fled. They held the hands of the dying. They witnessed suffering. They counted the dead. They did the jobs no one else would do, and for that, they deserve respect. Not the romanticized respect given to mysterious masked figures, but the real respect given to people who did horrifying, dangerous, futile work because it needed doing. They were humans, afraid and inadequate, doing their best in impossible circumstances. They mostly died. History mostly forgot them, but they mattered. Every plague doctor who put on that mask and walked into that plague house mattered. Because in the end, being a plague doctor wasn't about the bird mask or the leather coat. It was about witnessing suffering you couldn't stop, trying to help when help was impossible, and continuing to show up even when showing up probably meant dying. It was about humanity in the face of apocalypse, and that is worth remembering, even if nearly everything else about the job was absolutely terrible. But we're not done yet, because there are aspects of plague doctor life we haven't fully explored. The daily logistics of operating in a dying city, the economic realities of plague times, the specific mechanisms of failure that made the job even worse than the broad strokes suggest, the small moments of horror that don't fit into neat categories, but defined the experience nonetheless. Let's talk about what happens to your body when you wear that equipment all day. The bird mask weighs several pounds. It is not enormous weight, but it is all on your head and neck. After an hour, your neck starts aching. After 3 hours, the pain is constant. After a full day, you have a headache that pounds with every heartbeat. The weight pulls on your cervical spine. You are developing muscle strain. By the end of a week, you can barely turn your head without wincing. The mask also affects your balance. The long beak changes your center of gravity. You are top-heavy now. Climbing stairs is awkward. You have to relearn how to move. You bump the beak into door frames, into low ceilings, into other people if they don't get out of the way fast enough. The beak becomes an extension of yourself that you are constantly aware of. You can't forget you are wearing it. It is physically present in every action. Your jaw aches from holding your mouth in the same position for hours. The mask doesn't allow much movement. You can't open your mouth wide. You can't yawn properly. This creates tension in your jaw muscles. TMJ pain becomes constant. You are clenching your teeth without realizing it, bracing against the weight of the mask, against the stress of the job. Your dentist, if you had one, would be horrified by the damage you are doing to your jaw. The leather chafes. Where the mask edges meet your skin, friction creates sores. These sores worsen over days of continuous use. The leather is usually rough, not smoothed. It rubs your temples, your cheeks, your forehead. You develop raw patches. These patches sting when you sweat, which is constantly. You can't apply balm because that would mean removing the mask. So the sores just persist, painful reminders with every movement of your head. Your breathing becomes labored. The restricted airflow means you are not getting optimal oxygen. You are always slightly short of breath. This creates a feeling of panic, a constant low-grade sensation that you can't breathe properly. When you exert yourself, climbing stairs or walking quickly, the sensation intensifies. You feel like you are suffocating. You are not, quite, but the feeling is there, always. This chronic mild hypoxia affects your thinking. You are not as sharp as you should be. Decisions take longer. Observations are less detailed. You are working through a fog, both literally from the condensation in your mask and figuratively from the reduced oxygen. Medical examinations suffer. You miss things. You make errors. The equipment meant to protect you is also impairing you. The coat creates different problems. The weight is distributed across your shoulders, but it is substantial. 10 to 15 pounds of leather and wax. After hours of wear, your shoulders ache. Your back hurts. You are developing poor posture, hunching forward under the weight. This creates a cycle. Poor posture makes the coat feel heavier, which worsens your posture further. The coat restricts movement. You can't raise your arms fully. Reaching overhead is difficult. Bending down is awkward because the stiff leather doesn't flex well. You are moving like you are wearing armor, which in a sense you are. But armor restricts mobility, and you need mobility to examine patients, to navigate crowded rooms, to function. The protection costs you agility. Heat exhaustion is a constant threat. You are wearing heavy leather in often hot conditions. Your body generates heat through movement and stress. That heat can't escape. The leather traps it. Your core temperature rises. You are sweating profusely, becoming dehydrated, but you can't drink easily while wearing the mask. You'd have to remove it, which means exposure, so you endure the thirst, the overheating, the dizziness. Heat exhaustion makes you confused, clumsy, irritable. You are already working in horrible conditions. Heat exhaustion makes everything worse. Dehydration affects your kidneys. You are not drinking enough. Your urine becomes dark, concentrated. You are at risk for kidney stones, for urinary tract infections, for acute kidney injury if dehydration becomes severe. But there is no medical care for you. You are the medical care. So you suffer through it, hoping your kidneys hold out until the outbreak ends. The gloves create circulation problems. They're tight enough to stay on, which means they constrict blood flow slightly. After hours of wear, your hands go numb, your fingers tingle. You are losing fine motor control, not just from the thickness of the leather, but from reduced circulation. You flex your hands repeatedly, trying to maintain blood flow. It helps temporarily. The numbness always returns. Your feet suffer immensely. The boots are heavy, stiff, not designed for comfort. You are walking miles, per Dalton Y through city streets, up and down stairs, standing for hours during examinations. Blisters form. They burst. New blisters form on top of the raw skin. Your feet are bloody inside the boots. Each step hurts, but you keep walking. The work doesn't stop for foot pain. You can't properly care for these injuries. Removing boots means potential exposure to contamination on the floor. Washing and treating blisters takes time you don't have, so you just endure. You walk on damaged feet until the skin toughens into calluses, or until infection sets in. Foot infections are dangerous. They can spread up your leg. Without antibiotics, they can become life-threatening. You are aware of this. You limp through your rounds anyway. Let's talk about the specific houses you enter. Not all plague houses are the same. Some are wealthy homes with multiple rooms, decent ventilation, relatively clean. The wealthy get sick too. Their survival rate is slightly better because they have better nutrition, less crowded conditions, access to more care, but they still die. Wealth doesn't immunize you from bacteria. Entering a wealthy plague house is surreal. Fine furniture sits unused. Expensive tapestries hang on walls. Art decorates the rooms. And in the middle of this luxury, people are dying of plague. The contrast is jarring. Wealth creates comfort but not safety. The rich die in nicer beds. That is the only difference. Wealthy families expect better treatment. They've paid more, so they want more attention. They demand longer examinations, more explanations, assurances. You can't give. They're used to getting what they want. They can't buy survival. This frustrates them. They take that frustration out on you. You are treated as an inferior servant, even as you are risking your life to attend them. Poor plague houses are different. Smaller, more crowded, dirtier. Multiple families might live in one building. When plague strikes, it spreads through the entire structure. You enter a building and find sick people on every floor. The scale of infection is overwhelming. You can't properly examine everyone. You do quick assessments. You mark the building. You move on. There are too many houses. Too many sick. Not enough time. Poor families can't pay for care. Your services are officially city funded, but poor families still feel indebted. They apologize for taking your time. They thank you profusely for doing the minimum. Their gratitude is heartbreaking because you are not helping them. You are just witnessing their suffering. They thank you for witnessing, for not turning away, for treating them as human, even though society largely doesn't. The poorest plague victims have no houses at all. They're in alleyways, under bridges, in doorways. Homeless people who contract plague die in public spaces. No one claims their bodies immediately. They lie where they fell for hours, sometimes days. You are supposed to document these deaths too, but finding them all is impossible. The city's death toll is always an undercount. The homeless dead are often just cleared away, uncounted. Children from poor families are often alone when you find them, parents dead or fled, siblings dead. The child is sick, surrounded by corpses, terrified. They don't understand what is happening. They're hungry, thirsty, in pain. You can't take them with you. There is no system for orphan plague victims. You can report their location to city officials. Maybe someone will come. Probably no one will. The child will die alone. You document the location and move on. There is no good choice. Now let's talk about the different stages of plague in a city. The outbreak doesn't hit all at once, it builds. The first cases appear, just a few people sick with something that might be plague, might not be. You are called to examine them. You confirm it is plague. You mark the houses, you report to city officials. And then you wait for what you know is coming. The exponential growth phase is terrifying. 1 week, 10 cases. Next week, 50. The week after, 200. The numbers climb faster than anyone can manage. More houses marked daily. More streets affected. The plague spreads through neighborhoods like fire through dry grass. You are running from house to house, unable to keep up with the demand. You skip meals. You skip sleep. You are exhausted, and the outbreak is just beginning. The peak is apocalyptic. Deaths per Dalton. Why reach maximums? Hundreds in large cities. The death carts run constantly. Bodies pile up faster than they can be buried. The plague pits, mass graves on city outskirts, are filled daily. The smell of death hangs over the entire city. You can't escape it. It is in the air, in your clothes, in your memory. The city has become death. At the peak, you are working 20-hour days. There aren't enough plague doctors. There never are. You are covering territories meant for 3 people. You are making rushed assessments. You are missing details. You are so tired you are hallucinating. You see plague symptoms on healthy people. You mix up houses, patients, families. You are functioning on autopilot, muscle memory carrying you through tasks. Your conscious mind is too exhausted to process. The plateau phase is almost worse than the climb. The deaths stabilize at a horrible level and stay there. Day after day, the same massive death toll. It is no longer getting worse, but it is not getting better. It is just sustained catastrophe. You are numb to the numbers, 100 deaths today. That is normal now. 200 also normal. The horror has become routine. That realization that you've normalized mass death damages something fundamental in your psyche. The decline is slow. Deaths decrease gradually. 50 per Dalton. Why instead of 200? Then 20. Then 5. The outbreak is ending, but the decline takes weeks, sometimes months. You are still working through the tail end, still examining sick people, still marking houses. The work continues long after public attention has moved on. People are celebrating that the worst is over. You are still documenting deaths, daily. The aftermath is eerie. The city is depopulated. Entire neighborhoods are empty. Buildings stand with red crosses, still marked on doors. No one inside. Everyone dead or fled. The silence is profound. Cities are supposed to be noisy. This city is quiet as a tomb, because it essentially is a tomb. A tomb people are trying to live in again. You are part of the cleanup. Houses must be fumigated. Belongings of the dead must be dealt with. Bodies still being discovered must be removed. It is grim work. You are not a doctor anymore. You are waste management for human remains. But someone has to do it. Someone always has to do the jobs no one wants. Let's talk about the dreams. Every plague doctor who survived mentioned the dreams. Nightmares that come every night. You dream you are in a plague house. You can't find the door. The bodies are moving. The patients are blaming you. Why didn't you save us? You had one job. You failed. You wake up gasping, sweating, tangled in sheets. You are not in a plague house. You are safe. The relief lasts only seconds before guilt settles in. You survived. They didn't. Why did you deserve survival more than them? Other dreams are more abstract. Drowning in darkness, suffocating under weight. Being chased by something you can't see but know is death. These dreams don't need interpretation. The symbolism is obvious. You are processing trauma through dreams, but knowing why you are having nightmares doesn't stop them. They come every night. Sleep stops being rest and becomes another ordeal to endure. Some plague doctors reported dreams where they became the plague. They were the disease, spreading death wherever they went. People ran from them. They tried to call out, to explain they were trying to help, but no words came. They were voiceless vectors of death. These dreams reflected deep guilt and fear, the fear that maybe you were spreading plague, the guilt that your protective measures were inadequate, that you carried death between houses, even while trying to prevent it. Waking life started to feel dreamlike. The dissociation intensified. You are walking through a city of death. You are examining corpses. You are marking doors. But it doesn't feel real. It feels like a nightmare you can't wake from. The boundary between dreams and reality blurs. You are not sure which is which. Are you dreaming you are a plague doctor? Are you awake in a nightmare world? The uncertainty is distressing. You start to doubt your perceptions, your memories, your sanity. Let's talk about the small mercies, because there were a few rare moments of hope or humanity in the catastrophe. A patient who recovers. It doesn't happen often, but it happens. Someone you've examined, someone you've given last rites to, someone you've written off as dying survives. The buboes drain, the fever breaks. They're weak, scarred, damaged, but alive. These recoveries sustain you. They prove survival is possible. They give you hope that your presence matters, even if only as witness to miracles you didn't create. Families who stay together through plague, parents who don't abandon sick children, spouses who nurse each other, siblings who refuse to separate. These families often all die, but they die together, with love, with dignity. You witness these deaths differently. They're still tragic, but there is something beautiful in the refusal to abandon each other. It reminds you that humanity persists, even in apocalypse. Strangers helping strangers. Someone who leaves food at a quarantined house's doorstep. A neighbor who checks on sick families. A baker who donates bread to plague districts. These acts of generosity are risky. They're unnecessary. They happen anyway. People helping people for no reason, except that helping is right. These acts restore your faith. Humanity is capable of great cruelty. It is also capable of great kindness. Both exist in plague times. Children playing despite plague. They don't fully understand the danger. Or they understand but refuse to let it stop them. They play games in streets. They laugh. Their resilience is remarkable. They've seen death. They're living in horror. They play anyway. It is either inspiring or heartbreaking. Probably both. Childhood asserting itself against catastrophe. Animals continuing normal animal behavior. Birds singing. Cats hunting. Dogs being dogs. The world outside human concerns goes on. Nature doesn't care about plague. The sun rises. The seasons change. Life continues. There is comfort in that. The plague feels all-consuming. But it is just one event in a much larger world. The reminder that normalcy exists somewhere, even if not for you right now, helps. Now let's talk about the specific medical procedures in more detail. Bloodletting involved cutting a vein or artery and draining blood into a bowl. The amount varied. Sometimes a cup, sometimes much more. The theory was that bad blood carried disease. Remove the bad blood, cure the disease. Obviously, this didn't work, but the procedure was standardized, taught in medical schools, considered proper medicine. You'd use a lancet, a small sharp blade. You'd identify a vein in the patient's arm or leg. You'd cut carefully. Not too deep, or you'd cause damage. Deep enough to let blood flow. The patient would bleed into the bowl. You'd watch the color of the blood, supposedly gauging health by the appearance. Dark blood meant one thing, bright red meant another. These interpretations were nonsense, but they were taught as fact. The patient often fainted during bloodletting. Loss of blood caused weakness, dizziness, unconsciousness. This was considered positive. Fainting proved the bad humors were leaving. In reality, you were causing shock through blood loss. The patient was weaker after than before. If they survived plague, it was despite bloodletting, not because of it. Lancing buboes was more traumatic. The buboes were incredibly painful. Touching them caused intense pain. Cutting them was agony. You'd use a sharp knife. You'd position the blade at the peak of the swelling. You'd cut. The patient would scream. The bubo would rupture, expelling pus and blood. The smell was terrible. The sight was worse. You'd pack the wound with herbs or cloth. This sometimes prevented further infection. More often, it introduced infection. Some patients died from the shock of lancing. The pain was so intense it triggered cardiac arrest or stroke. You'd lance a bubo. The patient would convulse, and they'd die right there. This was considered unfortunate, but acceptable. You were trying to help. If they died from treatment, well, they were dying anyway. That is how it was rationalized. Cupping was another treatment. Heated glass cups were placed on skin. As they cooled, they created suction. This was supposed to draw out bad humors through the skin. It caused bruising and sometimes broke blood vessels. It did nothing for plague, but patients felt something happening. The physical sensation of treatment provided psychological comfort. Maybe that comfort helped some survive. Maybe it was just placebo. Either way, cupping was standard practice. Purging through induced vomiting or diarrhea was also common. Give the patient something to make them vomit or defecate. Empty their system of bad humors. In reality, you are dehydrating someone who is already losing fluids to fever and illness. It is counterproductive. But the theory seemed sound. Inside the body is corrupted. Empty the corruption out. Cure achieved. Except not. These treatments were torture disguised as medicine. Patients endured multiple procedures. Bloodletting and purging and cupping and lancing. All in one session. They were weak from plague, then further weakened by treatment. Some who might have survived died from the treatment. But refusing treatment wasn't an option. Treatment was expected. You had to do something, even if that something was harmful. Let's talk about the religious dimensions in more detail. Prayer was constant. You prayed before entering houses. You prayed over patients. You prayed while working. Prayer was supposed to protect you and heal patients. It didn't. But faith was all anyone had. When medicine fails, when human knowledge is inadequate, faith remains. You prayed because not praying meant admitting complete powerlessness. Prayer was action when no effective action existed. Exorcisms sometimes occurred. If miasma and humours didn't explain a case, maybe demons did. Priests performed exorcisms on plague victims, chanting, holy water, commands for demons to depart. The patient continued suffering because demons weren't the problem, but exorcism provided explanation. If treatment failed, it wasn't medical failure. The demons were too strong. That explanation preserved the medical system's credibility while patients died. Religious processions happened during plague, carrying holy relics through streets, praying publicly, seeking divine intervention. These processions gathered crowds. Crowds spread pneumonic plague faster. The religious response to plague often made plague worse. But no one knew that. They thought they were appealing to higher power. They were creating super spreader events. Flagellants were extreme. Groups of people who believed plague was punishment for sin. They wandered cities whipping themselves, their blood mixing with others, blood creating even more disease transmission opportunities. Authorities eventually banned flagellants, not because of disease spread concerns, but because public self-harm disturbed civic order. The ban was pragmatic, not medical. You, as a plague doctor, had to navigate religious tensions. Some clergy said you were doing God's work. Others said you were interfering with divine judgment. Some patients refused your care for religious reasons. God will cure me, or God will take me. Your medicine is unnecessary. You had to respect these refusals. You couldn't force treatment, so you'd document the refusal and leave. The patient would die, vindicated in their faith or killed by it, depending on perspective. Let's talk about the economics of plague at the city level. Plague destroyed economies. Trade stopped. Merchants fled. Markets closed. Production halted. The labour force died or was too sick to work. Cities hemorrhaged money while revenues vanished. Paying plague doctors was expensive. Paying for mass burials was expensive. Maintaining quarantines required enforcement, which cost money. Plague was financial catastrophe, on top of humanitarian catastrophe. Cities went into debt during plague. They borrowed from wealthy citizens, from banks, from other cities. The debt accumulated. After the plague, cities had to repay it. This meant higher taxes, reduced services, economic hardship for survivors. The plague's economic impact lasted decades. It shaped city finances for generations. The immediate deaths were horrible. The long-term economic damage kept communities poor for years. Some individuals profited from plague. Undertakers worked overtime. Grave diggers charged premium rates. Merchants who stayed open raised prices. It was supply and demand in its most cynical application. Desperate people paid anything. Unethical people exploited that desperation. Not everyone was noble during plague. Some saw opportunity and seized it. Inheritance became complicated. Families died out. No clear heirs. Property sat unclaimed. Cities appointed administrators to handle estates. These administrators were often corrupt. They'd skim money, claim property for themselves, forge documents. The legal chaos of mass death created opportunities for fraud. Survivors sometimes came home to find their inheritance stolen, their property sold, their rights ignored. Plague brought out the worst in people, not just medically but legally and ethically. Orphans became a massive social problem. Thousands of children lost parents. Extended families were dead or couldn't take more children. Orphanages were overwhelmed. Many orphans ended up on streets. Child beggars became common. These children, traumatized and unsupervised, were vulnerable to exploitation. Some were taken as unpaid workers, essentially slaves. Others turned to crime. Plague created waves of social problems that persisted for years after the disease itself ended. Let's talk about the moment you know you are infected. It is not always dramatic. Sometimes it is subtle. A slight fever you try to ignore. An ache that might be muscle strain. You convince yourself it is exhaustion. You've been working hard. Of course you are tired. Of course you hurt. But deep down, you know, the fever isn't going away. The ache is locating to your lymph nodes. It is plague. The realization is terrifying. You've seen hundreds of people die from plague. You know exactly what is coming. The progression is familiar. Fever, buboes, delirium, death. You know the timeline. Days if you are unlucky. A week or two if you are lucky. The knowledge makes it worse. Ignorance would be merciful. You have too much knowledge. You can predict your own decline. You have to tell someone, officially report your illness. This ends your work. You are quarantined, isolated. You go from being essential to being a threat. The transition is abrupt. Yesterday you were needed. Today you are dangerous. Your colleagues avoid you, not from cruelty, from the same fear you've seen in everyone else. Plague is terrifying. Even plague doctors fear it. You are alone in your illness. The isolation is complete. Someone might leave food and water outside your door. Maybe, if they remember. If they're not too afraid, you might go days without seeing another person. You are dying in solitude. This might be the cruelest part, not the disease itself, but the absolute loneliness of it. Your mind starts bargaining. Maybe it is not plague, maybe it is something else. You examine your own buboes with desperate hope that there's something else. Maybe just swollen glands from regular infection. Maybe a cyst, maybe anything other than plague. But the buboes grow, the fever intensifies, the denial breaks. It is plague. You are dying. All your efforts at protection failed. Some plague doctors tried to treat themselves, lancing their own buboes, bloodletting themselves, taking their own herbal preparations. These self-treatments were as ineffective as when applied to others. But doing something felt better than doing nothing. Action provided illusion of control, even when the action was futile. The end stage, if you reach it, is delirium. The fever spikes. Your brain swells. You are confused, hallucinating. You don't recognize where you are. Time becomes meaningless. You are experiencing fragments of consciousness separated by darkness. The fever dreams are vivid and terrible. You are back in plague houses. The dead are speaking to you. You are drowning. You are burning. The hallucinations are your brain dying. Some plague doctors in their final delirium tried to keep working. They'd get up, put on their mask, walk out to attend patients. They'd collapse in the street. Sometimes they'd be found and brought back. Sometimes they'd die there. The dedication persisted even as their minds failed. Or maybe the routine was so ingrained that even delirium couldn't stop it. Either way, it is tragic. Working to the literal end. Death, when it comes, might be relief. The suffering stops. The fear ends. There is nothing after, but whatever you believe comes after. Your body is collected eventually. You are buried in a plague pit with your patients. Full circle. You entered plague houses to document deaths. Now you are part of the count. Another statistic. Another casualty of the job. But here is what matters: you tried. With inadequate knowledge, with ineffective tools, with insufficient protection, you tried. You couldn't cure plague. No one could. But you witnessed suffering. You provided what comfort was possible. You stayed when everyone else fled. That counts for something. In fact, it counts for a lot. History needs witnesses. Someone has to document the horror so future generations know what happened. Plague doctors did that. Their records help us understand the scale and impact of plague. Their observations, even when their interpretations were wrong, give us data. Science eventually figured out what plague really was and how it spread. That science built on observations recorded by plague doctors who didn't know they were contributing to future breakthroughs. Modern medicine exists partly because of what plague doctors learned through failure. They documented what didn't work. That is valuable information. They showed that miasma theory was inadequate, even if they couldn't propose an alternative. They demonstrated that protective equipment needed improvement. They proved that plague was a massive public health problem requiring systematic response, not just individual treatment. The plague doctor's legacy isn't their bird mask, though that is what we remember. It is their service. Their willingness to enter hell repeatedly. because people needed help, their documentation of catastrophe, their witness to suffering, their demonstration of courage in the face of almost certain death. Those are the things worth remembering. So yes, being a plague doctor sucked. It sucked immensely. It was terrifying, futile, and usually fatal. The job combined maximum danger with minimum effectiveness. You worked in conditions that should have been impossible, using methods that didn't work, protecting people you couldn't actually save. You died in significant numbers, traumatized if you survived, and forgotten by history, except as a spooky costume. But it was also important, essential, noble even. Somebody had to document the deaths, had to bear witness, had to stay in the city when everyone else fled. Plague doctors were those somebodies. They deserved to be remembered not as creepy figures in bird masks, but as humans who did impossible jobs under impossible conditions, because those jobs needed doing. And that is what it really meant to be a plague doctor. Not mystery, not drama, just dedicated, terrified people trying to help in a situation where help was nearly impossible. They failed medically. They succeeded morally. They couldn't cure plague, but they faced it anyway. That is courage. That is sacrifice. That is humanity at its best, in the midst of humanity, at its worst. And that is why it sucked to be a plague doctor, but also why plague doctors mattered. They were witnesses to apocalypse who stayed at their posts until plague or death relieved them. History should remember them for that, not just for the masks. The people behind the masks deserve recognition, respect, and gratitude. They were heroes in an age that couldn't save them. They were the best of us in the worst of times. And that is the truth about plague doctors, all of it. The horror, the futility, the courage, the sacrifice, the importance. They were humans doing an inhuman job because humanity needed it done. They deserve better than being Halloween costumes. They deserve to be remembered as what they were: brave, doomed, essential, and entirely human in the face of apocalyptic disease. That is what it meant to be a plague doctor. That is why it sucked. And that is why it mattered anyway. But there is one more layer we need to explore. The personal stories that didn't make it into official records. The individual moments of horror and courage that defined the plague doctor experience. The specific details that make this not just historical information but human tragedy. Because behind every statistic was a person. Behind every documented death was a plague doctor who witnessed it. And those witnesses deserve to have their experience fully told. Let's talk about the first time you see a dead child. Nothing prepares you for it. You've seen adult corpses. You've documented adult deaths. But a child is different. They're small. They look like they're sleeping, except they're not breathing. And their skin has that waxy pallor of death. Maybe they're holding a toy. Maybe there is still food next to their bed that they didn't finish. The mundane details make it worse. This was a person with a life. Now that life is stopped, parents react differently to their children's deaths. Some are catatonic with grief. They sit beside the small body, not moving, not speaking. You have to gently move them to examine the child. They resist without really resisting. They don't want to leave their child alone. You understand. You wish you could let them stay, but you have documentation to complete. Other houses waiting. The work continues. Even when compassion demands you stop. Other parents are angry. At you, at God, at the plague, at everything. They yell. Sometimes they threaten violence. You are the target because you are there. You are alive and their child isn't. That seems unfair to them. It is unfair. You can't argue. You let them yell. Eventually they collapse into grief. The anger burns out quickly. The grief remains. Some parents try to bargain with you, as if you have power over death. Save them. Please. I'll give you anything. I'll pay anything. Just save my child. And you can't. The child is already dead, or dying beyond any help you could provide. You have to tell them there is nothing you can do. Watching hope die in their eyes is its own form of death. They asked for a miracle. You are delivering a death sentence. The role is cruel. You document the child's death. Age, symptoms, time of death as best you can estimate. The clinical details that reduce a human life to data points. Name if you can get it. Sometimes parents are too distraught to speak. Sometimes the child dies alone and no one knows their name. You write unknown child in your records. That anonymity is heartbreaking. This person existed. They mattered to someone. But history won't remember their name. Now let's talk about the smell in detail. Because the smell of plague is something that stays with you forever. It is not just unpleasant, it is visceral. It triggers nausea, dread, memories. The smell of rot and sickness and death combined into an olfactory nightmare that penetrates everything. Fresh plague victims smell like sickness. Fever sweat has a distinct scent, sharp and acidic, combined with unwashed bodies with urine and feces from patients too weak to use chamber pots properly, with the beginning of decay. It is the smell of biological systems failing. Your nose recognizes it as wrong before your brain processes why. Buboes have their own smell. When they rupture, the pus and blood and necrotic tissue release an odor of rot. It is similar to gangrene, but not quite the same. There is a sweetness to it. Not pleasant sweetness, sickly sweetness. The smell of flesh dying while the person is still alive. It clings to your mask, to your clothes, to your memory. Bodies left in the heat for hours or days before removal smell worse. Decomposition accelerates in warm conditions. The gases released by bacterial activity create a stench that is overwhelming. You've smelled rot before. Dead animals, spoiled food. This is worse. This is human decomposition. Your brain recognizes it as fundamentally wrong. Your stomach rebels. You vomit into your mask the first few times. Eventually you get used to it. That adaptation is its own tragedy. You've become accustomed to the smell of human decay. The death carts smell terrible. They're never cleaned properly. They carry corpses all day. The wood absorbs fluids. The smell soaks in. Even empty, a death cart smells like death. When full, loaded with dozens of bodies, the concentrated stench is apocalyptic. You can smell a death cart from a block away. People close their windows when they hear one coming. Not just to avoid seeing it, to avoid smelling it. Plague pits are the worst. Mass graves with hundreds or thousands of bodies. The decomposition of that many corpses creates a miasma that is visible. The air shimmers above plague pits from the gases. The smell extends for miles downwind. It is so bad that lime is poured over bodies to accelerate decomposition and reduce odor. The lime helps. Not enough. You can still smell the plague pit from the city centre when the wind is wrong. Your own smell becomes problematic. You are sweating constantly inside your leather coat. The sweat soaks your clothes, mixes with the leather smell, with the herbs in your mask. You haven't properly bathed in weeks. Water is scarce, and you are always working. You smell like work, like death houses, like leather and sweat and herbs and fear. People smell you coming before they see you. Another reason they avoid you. Let's talk about the sounds of plague. The crying is constant. Families mourning. Patients in pain. Children who don't understand why they hurt. The crying comes from every house, every street. It is the soundtrack of plague. A city of wailing. At first it is distressing. Eventually it becomes background noise, the normalization of grief. When the crying stops, that is worse. That means everyone who could cry has died or fled. The silence of death replaces the sounds of grief. The death bells toll constantly during peak outbreak. Churches ring bells for each death. In normal times this is solemn. During plague the bells never stop. One death, another, another. The ringing blends together into continuous noise. Some cities stop ringing death bells during plague because it is too depressing. The constant reminder that people are dying, that death is everywhere, damages morale. The silence is imposed to preserve sanity. Coughing echoes through plague districts. Pneumonic plague causes severe respiratory symptoms. You hear the wet, productive coughs from inside houses as you walk past. Each cough is someone drowning in their own lungs. You know what that cough means. That person is dying, probably quickly. The cough is a countdown. You hear it everywhere. It haunts your sleep. The death cart drivers sing sometimes. Not happy songs. Work songs. Songs to pace their labour. Songs to distract from what they're doing. Bring out your dead becomes a chant. A call through streets. It is practical. It is also macabre. The casualness with which death is collected. The routine of mass death. The songs make it more surreal. How do you sing while loading corpses? How do you make death into a job you can whistle through? Your own breathing inside the mask is loud in your ears. The leather amplifies it. You hear every breath, laboured through the herb, stuffed beak. It is claustrophobic. The sound reminds you constantly that you are cut off from the world. Breathing filtered air in a leather bubble. The sound of your own survival efforts. Let's talk about the ethics of the job, because plague doctors faced moral dilemmas constantly. Do you spend more time with a wealthy patient who can pay or a poor patient who can't? The ethical answer is to treat everyone equally. The practical answer is that the wealthy have influence and the poor don't. If you neglect a wealthy patient, you might lose your position. If you neglect a poor patient, no one notices. You try to balance ethics and survival. Sometimes you fail. Do you tell families the truth about their loved one's prognosis? Honesty says yes, but honesty destroys hope. If you tell a mother her child will die, she spends the child's last days in despair. If you lie, give false hope, she has a few more days of hope before the inevitable grief, which is kinder. You make different choices with different families. There is no right answer. Do you risk your life for patients you know you can't save? Professional duty says yes. Self-preservation says no. Every house you enter increases your infection risk. If the patient is clearly dying, is it worth the risk? You go anyway, because someone has to witness, because leaving them to die alone is too cruel, because your job is to be there even when being there is futile. But the risk compounds. Eventually, it catches up to you. Do you report suspected plague cases, even when marking the house means condemning the whole family to quarantine? The sick person might die. The healthy family members will be trapped with them. They'll likely get infected. By reporting the case, you are essentially sentencing them all to death. But not reporting means the plague spreads further. You are choosing between one family and the broader community. There is no good choice. Some plague doctors lied on their reports, recorded deaths as something other than plague to spare families from quarantine. This was illegal, dangerous to public health, and understandable. The human cost of quarantine was so high. Families died together in locked houses. The impulse to spare people from that fate was strong. Some doctors gave in to that impulse. They saved a few families and potentially spread the plague to dozens more. Now let's talk about the moment you realize you are becoming numb. It is gradual. At first, each death affects you. You feel sorrow, pity, horror. But you can't sustain that level of emotional engagement through hundreds of deaths. Your mind protects itself by dulling your emotions. You start feeling less. Deaths become statistics. Patients become cases. The work becomes mechanical. You notice this change in yourself. You examine a corpse with no emotional reaction. You document a family's deaths with clinical detachment. You mark a house, knowing everyone inside will likely die, and you feel nothing. This realization is disturbing. Have you lost your humanity? Are you becoming a monster? Or are you just adapting to impossible circumstances? The numbness is survival. If you felt everything fully, you'd break. So your mind creates distance. But the distance comes with guilt. You should care. These are people dying. But you can't care about each individual death without going insane. So you stop caring. And then you feel guilty about not caring. There is no winning. Other plague doctors notice when you become numb. They recognize it because they've been through it or are going through it themselves. There is an unspoken understanding. We're all doing the best we can. We're all damaged by this. The shared trauma creates bonds. You don't have to explain to another plague doctor why you don't cry anymore. They know, they understand. That understanding is the only support system you have. Let's talk about religious doubt. If you were religious before plague, you probably question your faith during. Why would God allow this? Why do children suffer? Why are good people dying while cruel people survive? These questions have no satisfying answers. Some plague doctors lose their faith entirely. God is dead, or never existed, or doesn't care. The universe is random. Suffering is meaningless. This nihilism is depressing, but it feels true. Other plague doctors' faith intensifies. The suffering must mean something. God has a plan. The plague is a test. They pray harder, believe more fervently. Faith becomes armor against despair. Whether that faith is justified doesn't matter. It helps them function. It gives meaning to meaningless suffering. That is valuable, even if it is irrational. Some oscillate between faith and doubt, praying in the morning, cursing God by evening, believing when you see someone recover, despairing when you see a child die. Faith becomes unstable. You can't fully believe or fully disbelieve. You exist in uncertainty. That might be the most honest position. The universe doesn't offer clear answers. Maybe uncertainty is appropriate. Clergy struggle with similar questions. Priests giving last rites to dying parishioners, watching prayers fail to heal. They're supposed to have answers. They don't. Some admit their doubt. Others hide behind dogma. The honest ones acknowledge that suffering is mystery. They can't explain it. They can only witness it alongside you. Those honest clergy earn your respect. The dogmatic ones frustrate you. Easy answers for hard questions don't satisfy anyone. Now let's talk about the specific trauma responses you develop. Hypervigilance becomes constant. You are always scanning for plague symptoms. Someone coughs and you flinch. Someone looks feverish and you are mentally documenting it. You can't turn off the diagnostic mindset. Everyone is a potential plague case. Everywhere is a potential infection site. Your brain is stuck in threat detection mode. Insomnia is nearly universal among plague doctors. You're exhausted but can't sleep. Your mind races, reviewing the day's deaths, worried about tomorrow's patients, analyzing your own symptoms. Is that ache in your armpit a bubo starting? Is that warmth fever or just the hot room? You lie awake, hyper-aware of your own body, terrified of every sensation. When you do sleep, the nightmares come. We've discussed this. But it is worth emphasizing. The nightmares are worse than the insomnia. You are trapped in plague houses in your dreams, unable to escape, unable to save anyone. The patients blame you. You wake up gasping, relieved to be awake, but now you can't sleep again. It is a cycle of insomnia and nightmares with no rest. Startle response becomes exaggerated. Loud noises make you jump. Sudden movements make you flinch. Your nervous system is on high alert constantly. This is exhausting. It is also dangerous. Your impaired reaction makes you clumsy. You drop things. You bump into objects. You are physically impaired by your psychological state. Dissociation episodes increase. You are examining a patient, and suddenly you are not there. You are floating above yourself, watching your body go through the motions, or you are somewhere else entirely. Your mind is protecting itself by removing you from trauma. These episodes are concerning, but also necessary. Without them, you'd break completely. Some plague doctors develop compulsions, repetitive behaviors that provide illusion of control. Checking your equipment exactly 7 times before leaving, saying a specific prayer at every house, touching a particular object for luck. These rituals are irrational. They also help. They're something you can control when everything else is chaos. The compulsions increase as stress increases. Let's talk about substance abuse among plague doctors. Alcohol is common. Wine is safer than water in many places. But some doctors drink heavily, using alcohol to numb the horror. They're drunk while working. Their examinations suffer. Their judgment is impaired, but sober, they can't function at all. The alcohol is self-medication. It is also slow suicide. Many drinking plague doctors die of alcoholism, if plague doesn't kill them first. Other drugs are available, opium-based preparations for pain. Some plague doctors use these recreationally, seeking escape from reality. The drugs provide temporary relief. They also create dependence. You need more over time. The addiction becomes another problem on top of everything else. Some die from overdoses. Others survive plague, but remain addicted for life. Tobacco becomes popular during plague years. Smoking is thought to purify air. It doesn't, but the belief persists. Some plague doctors smoke constantly. It gives them something to do with their hands. The ritual is calming. The nicotine provides mild stimulation. It is less destructive than alcohol or opium, but still a crutch. Something to help you through the day. Self-medication is understandable. You are in hell. Drugs and alcohol provide temporary escape, but they also make you less effective. Your patients suffer from your impairment. The ethical compromise weighs on you. You are supposed to be helping. Your substance abuse makes you less helpful, but you can't function without it. There is no good solution. Now let's talk about what happens after plague ends. The city recovers slowly. Markets reopen. People return. Life resumes a semblance of normalcy. But you can't resume normal life. You are too changed. The experiences don't fade. They stay with you constantly. You jump at reminders of plague. Someone coughing in a market triggers panic. You have to leave immediately. Someone mentions feeling feverish, and you are backslide into plague mindset. Is this another outbreak? You can't shake the fear that plague will return. It probably will. Plague comes in waves. But the fear is out of proportion, even to real risk. You avoid crowds. Too many people in one place feels dangerous. Disease spreads through crowds. You know this viscerally. You can't force yourself into crowded spaces without severe anxiety. This limits where you can go, what you can do. You become isolated not by law but by your own damaged psychology. You have intrusive memories. You are going about your day and suddenly you are back in a plague house. You see a corpse that isn't there. You smell rot that isn't present. The memories intrude without warning. They're vivid and distressing. You can't control them. They happen and you have to endure them until they pass. You can't connect with people who weren't there. They don't understand what you experienced. Their problems seem trivial. They complain about minor inconveniences. You survived apocalypse. Their concerns don't resonate. This creates distance. You can't relate to normal people. They can't relate to you. Other plague survivors understand, but being around them triggers memories. You see them and remember plague times. The camaraderie is real, but painful. You bond over shared trauma. That bond is also a reminder of what you went through. Some plague doctors seek out other survivors. Others avoid them. Both responses are valid. Years pass, the acute trauma symptoms fade slowly. You have fewer nightmares. The hypervigilance decreases, but you never fully recover. The experience is too significant. It changed your brain structure. You are permanently different. You cope. You adapt. You live. But you are never the same person you were before. Let's talk about the historical memory of plague doctors. In contemporary records, they're mentioned briefly. Hired during outbreak. Paid certain amounts. Some died. The records are sparse and bureaucratic. They don't capture the human experience. Historians have to extrapolate from scattered evidence. Popular culture remembers the mask. The bird-beaked silhouette is iconic. It appears in art, in literature, in modern media, but the context is lost. The mask becomes creepy aesthetic divorced from historical reality. Halloween costumes and video game characters. The horror is sanitized, made palatable. The real people behind the masks are forgotten. Some modern portrayals are more accurate. Historical novels, documentaries, academic works, these try to capture the real experience. They're better but still limited. You can't fully convey the horror through any medium. The smell, the sounds, the accumulated trauma, these are experiential. You had to be there, and if you were there, you'd be changed forever. During COVID-19, plague doctors were invoked as historical parallel. Modern healthcare workers wearing PPE compared to plague doctors in bird masks. The comparison is apt in some ways. Both groups risked infection to help others. Both wore uncomfortable protective equipment. Both witnessed mass death. But the differences are significant. Modern medicine can actually treat disease. Protective equipment actually works. The mortality rate is lower. COVID was terrible. The plague was worse. That comparison does serve to remind us. Plague doctors were real people. Not spooky figures. Real humans doing horrible jobs in impossible conditions. Their courage is worth remembering. Their sacrifice is worth honouring. They failed to cure plague, but succeeded in being human in inhuman circumstances. That success matters more than medical failure. So here we are at the end of this journey through plague doctor history. We've covered the equipment failures, the futile treatments, the psychological damage, the ethical dilemmas, the social isolation, the personal stories. All of it necessary to understand what this job really was. Not mysterious or romantic or cool. Traumatic, dangerous, futile, and important. If you are a modern person reading this, you are probably grateful you weren't a plague doctor. That is reasonable. It was a terrible job. But also remember, plague doctors weren't special. They were ordinary people in extraordinary circumstances. They did what needed to be done because someone had to do it. Under similar circumstances, you might have to do something similar. Different disease, different equipment, but same core situation. Would you rise to the occasion like they did? History isn't just about what happened. It is about what it means. Plague doctors mean something. They show us that humans can face horror and keep functioning. They show us that futile effort is still worthwhile if the cause is just. They show us that courage isn't the absence of fear, but continuing despite fear. They show us that witnessing suffering has value even when you can't stop the suffering. And maybe most importantly, they show us that we honour the dead not by forgetting how they died, but by remembering accurately and completely. Plague killed millions. Plague doctors witnessed those deaths. We remember both. The victims who suffered, the doctors who witnessed, both deserve our recognition, our respect, our careful historical attention. Being a plague doctor sucked, completely and utterly. No aspect of the job was good, but the people who did it were good. That is what we should remember. Not the creepy masks, not the failed medicine. The people, human beings who walked into plague houses when everyone else ran away, who documented death when they could have fled, who stayed at their posts knowing they'd probably die. Those people were heroes. Tragic, doomed, futile heroes. But heroes nonetheless. And that is the complete story of what it meant to be a plague doctor. Every horrible, heroic detail. Remember them, honor them. And if you ever face similar circumstances, if history repeats and epidemic becomes pandemic, becomes apocalypse, remember the plague doctors. They showed us how to face the end of the world with courage, dignity, and dedication to witnessing, even when witness is all you can offer. That is why it sucked to be a plague doctor, and that is why plague doctors matter forever.